Actors Leonard Whiting and Olivia Hussey are suing at Paramount Pictures for sexual abuse over a scene in the 1968 film Romeo and Juliet. The actors are now in their 70s, but they were 16 and 15 at the time of the shoot. And they claim that the director, Franco Zeffirelli, encouraged them to film a nude scene. Whiting and Hussey are looking for damages of more than $500 million because of the suffering they've experienced and the money made by the film. So joining me to discuss this is the writer and critic, Frank Furedi. Good evening, Frank. Frank, I want to ask you first about this. There is some sort of moral ambiguity here, isn't there? Just simply by dint of the age of the actors when they were involved in the film. They were underage. So does that not make this a clear-cut case that this should not have happened?
Well, it doesn't, because I remember when the film came out, I'm old enough to know students, school children, who watched the film in schools. It was shown widely in many, many schools doing English lessons about Shakespeare. And in those days, nobody had any problems with the film. The film is a beautiful film. It's very subtly done. There's nothing ambiguous about it. The only problem with the film is that from our perspective, the guys that run Hollywood argue that it should never be made. And the problem is that they don't just simply say that it should never have been made. They're telling us that because it should not have been made, it now constitutes some kind of a cultural crime for which somebody has got to pay. And it seems to me that what we're trying to do is essentially, through the process of grievance archaeology, try to find scenes from films in the past, which some people are uncomfortable with, and use that as a way of creating a kind of return to the beginning Me Too movement, where the Me Too movement goes back to the distant past and finds new targets to criminalize. And I don't think there's any ambiguity about it. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the film. There's nothing pornographic about it. It's a very gentle scene, in fact. And I just know, talking to parents at the time, they had, these were good parents, who looked after their kids. They had no problems about allowing their kids to watch that so-called nude scene.
The argument, though, Frank, would be that because the actors were underage, they could not possibly consent to being nude in the film. And given that the scene itself, it has a sexual basis to it, then this is different than, say, the nudity of, say, in Roman Polanski's Macbeth, where you have a young boy naked, but there's no sexual element to that scene, so it's a different thing. Do you accept that point?
I don't. I think that the question of consent is something that is raised time and time again. So some people argue that it's wrong that a Jewish family insists that their boy should become circumcised because the child never consented to that. Or they will say that it's totally wrong that a Catholic child is forced to go into a Jesuit seminary because the child didn't consent to that. The point is that parents do a lot of things to which children don't consent because obviously they're underage, they're not adults who are in a position to make informed consent. And that happens all the time within the filmmaking industry. So it seems to me to kind of pick out this one area for special consideration is utterly wrong, because the logic of that is that anything that children did not consent to in any domain of human experience can become a target for claims making, for trying to get money out of that.
My understanding is that all of this has come about because the statute of limitations has been suspended and therefore action can be taken at this point. But to what extent do you think that the recent legacy of Me Too, and particularly how that has impacted Hollywood, has made these kinds of cases more likely?
Well, there's been a convergence. I don't know if you heard, but for example, Molly Ringwood, who was one of the stars in that famous film, The Breakfast Club, wrote a series of articles in the New Yorker saying that she thought the film should not have been made. It has certain abusive elements to it. She's not actually claiming any money in her case. But I think what's interesting about her statement on this is that she's basically saying that the kind of values that the Me Too movement stands for today should become retrospective. We got to kind of go back and look at material in the past and judge them in light of the Me Too criterion, which I think is extremely troublesome, because essentially what we're doing is we're almost introducing a new culture of retrospective censorship, where we kind of retrospectively go back and we clean up films. We basically find there are certain pictures that needs to be somehow censored. I don't know if you remember that very famous picture of Jean-Paul Sartre, where he's there, of Camus, I'm sorry, Albert Camus smoking a cigarette. And in many, many places now the cigarette has been taken out, so the poor guy is just, sort of standing there or sitting there like that. And we begin to do that with cartoons and gradually with great films, great pieces of art. And I do think that it's bad enough when the Me Too movement incites censorship in the here and now. I think it's even worse when it tries to do that with the incredibly important works of art in the past.
So you see this very much as a continuation of the other trend that we have seen of people attempting to problematize films that were made many, many years ago and even take certain scenes out of films and that kind of thing. Is that right?
Exactly. I think it's a way of basically saying that I've got a right, because of my sensibility, to decide what that film should look like. Not the director, not the artistic producers, but me, the censor, is going to have the final say. But there's also one additional element in this. You see, in Hollywood, there's now a group of individuals who are making a lot of money, essentially by going around that if you think you've been abused, you think you've been traumatized, call us up and we'll go and launch a lawsuit on your behalf. And I think there's going to be a lot more cases like this, because what you have here is the convergence of censorship, Me Tooism, identity politics on the one hand, and money making on the other hand. So it's a powerful combination.
I'm going to have to stop you at that point because we have run out of time. But thank you so much for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it. That is it for the